left. I guess is a fair way to describe it.
Yeah. Okay, he's recording this. Yeah. So yeah, we've got committee members and a couple extra, some other interested parties. So I'll call the meeting to order, and take a look at the agenda. I hope everybody's had a chance to take a look at it. It's circulated by email. Anything we want to add to it or shuffle around?
I forgot to add, just a quick discussion about the process for requesting spending of funds, but I'll do that at the end.
Okay. Yeah, I probably won't, we don't have to worry about time particularly, so I probably won't try and drive through it and probably shuffle as we go. Anything else that people want to talk about? Cool. Anybody want to make a motion about approving minutes?
Make a motion that we approve last month's meeting minutes.
Okay. Motion made by Mr. Holton. I think in the school board, they say you don't need a second for the meeting, so, you know, the meetings are really small.
I'll second.
Roger seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Same.
Okay. Minutes approved. Public comment. No members of the public particularly, so we have the status report from TPL, but I don't know that, well, actually, there's a couple of things. One thing, I got a message from Kate Warner that Stone Environmental had retested the site around the telephone pole, and there were still whatever it was, PCBs or whatever it is they're trying to get rid of. So they were gonna have to go back and get some more soil. She did give me the contacts from Stone that I'll have to look up to find out the details. But that was 3 weeks ago, and I haven't heard anything more since then. So that's still something ongoing.
Well, I noticed that they taken an excavator up the road, flattened it all out, put crushed stone over the road.
The road from
goes from
15
feet up.
Wow.
So it looked like anybody could drive up there. So I told Jack about it, and I put a cable across with I couldn't find a sign that said no vehicles. I got a nice red sign that nobody will run into. It says keep gate closed. It is cabled off right now on the road.
Okay. Okay, is it, so, you know, it's got a padlock on it, or it's just a
Cable clamps. If I had some kind of idea, I could take them off in advance, but
yeah. I bet if they're coming with equipment, they probably have a toolbox on the truck.
it's sure.
Does the gravel go all the way up to the telephone pole, or is it?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, up the vertical part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's smooth.
Yeah.
There's no water.
No, okay,
No, so it's not the best.
yeah,
Whatever. I'm sure it looks really accessible for four-wheelers and any other thing.
that's what worries me.
You know,
Yeah.
check it
That's what
out.
worries me, yeah,
So whatever.
but the cable will help.
The only thing they actually around the telephone pole where the site was, they've got it seeded mulch, but nothing else.
We'll have to dig all that up again, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the info. I guess I hadn't noticed it, driven by a couple of times, but I hadn't been looking at the road and stuff.
And hopefully you didn't notice it, maybe no one else did either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I do. I didn't let my eyes wander. So I'll check with the contacts that Kate sent to me, and that's all I know from TPL. they're interested, they want to know about our planning for a grand opening party. And obviously it's getting the stone was a big feather in their cap, so they're going to want to see that it's properly celebrated. Uh, so that's just outstanding in my mind. That's what I know from TPL. So then, Brooke, the next item on my agenda says a trail building update from Sinuosity.
Yes. Hi.
Hey. Tell us what's going on. Put you on the spot, man. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. We focused on the school trail, going both directions from the school. And we finished the connection going up to the main intersection on the town forest.
Mhm.
And then we worked down the other way towards Flatiron Road, and I finished just the other day down there. We haven't done the bridge yet, but the rest of the work is done for that connection to the road.
So from the school down to Flatiron Road, it was dark when I drove by like half an hour ago.
Okay.
So I saw your equipment out there, but I from below the school, I didn't see. Is it visible? Is it coming out onto the road, or where's it?
The equipment's at kind of the very end, and it was a little wet when I finished the other day. There's like a kind of a seep before you get out onto the road.
Yeah.
So I just parked right there, so it sort of blocked the trail. So it's directly behind the equipment is
Okay.
where I finished.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and it came out really nice. I put in a culvert on the old road. There's sort of a drainage ditch that crosses the road at one point, and I put in a nice big culvert so that will catch anything as it comes through. And then did some switchbacks up to the field, the school field, and then we did the connection the other direction that Roger has seen.
Mhm. Okay. So I'm trying to visualize the part below the school. I actually have walked and ridden on the trails from the school field to go up to the southeast, essentially.
Right.
So yeah, that's looking good. It's nice to see it. But where does it pull out from to go down from the school? Where do you access the trail?
Um, it would be, I think, the western end of the field. There's an existing older trail that
Yeah.
we
Okay.
have,
Yeah.
and there's like some old like Halloween costume looking things or decoration
Yeah.
things and some plastic chairs, and
Yeah.
it starts right there.
Okay. Cool. I'll go looking for it. So next opportunity.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. So, how much more work do you guys think you'll be able to get to this season?
I think we're done. We're definitely done with the machine work, and we could do a little bit more corridor clearing and sawing work on what we had started.
Uh,
But our crew has mostly wrapped up for the year, so it's really just me at this point.
okay.
Um, so with other kind of end of the season stuff, I'm not expecting a whole lot more for this year, um, unless there was a group of volunteers that wanted to come out and get reorganized. I would
Mhm.
I would mobilize for that. But right now, I'm kind of just putting things to bed.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't done well with the mobilizing and, getting volunteer stuff coordinated. But, so just playing back what I'm hearing is if we could get a few people who wanted to volunteer, you'd be willing to, arrange to come and help guide some volunteers.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
It would.
If we got 2 or 3 people, would that be enough, or would you want to have a bigger crew than that?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
We are taking an end of the season trip, so we're in and out for the next few weeks. But there's yeah, if people want to organize, we can try to coordinate a time.
Okay. Cool. And I promise not to abuse your cell phone numbers, but
Right.
I can maybe I can reach out. So I'm filing that information away because I think it's probably easier to get a couple of people who would be interested in doing some work than you know, getting a crew, you know, big crew for a Saturday morning or something. So
Yeah, that sounds fine. And once we kind of like Roger's gotten the lowdown, and once we kind of get all on the same page of the little details of how we like to disperse brush, it's something that people can chip away at as they have time or interest.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Cool.
Okay. Fantastic. Anything else we should know about, or and also looking around the room, does anybody have questions for Brooke?
I guess, is there a, sort of like weather deadline? I'm assuming this volunteer can't go all through the winter, or can some things actually be done in winter?
We've done a fair amount of cutting, and so stuff is down sort of where it fell.
Yeah.
It's all very small. It's really just tiny saplings. And doing that before there's a layer of snow is going to be easier. It's possible with a couple inches of light snow, but if we get anything that starts to like ice over, it's going to be not fun. So, you know, given the trend of our winters not really starting till who knows when, there could be plenty of time in the future to get back out there. But yeah, just easier when there isn't snow.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad you could make it. Welcome to stick around. Sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I might just mention a couple things now in terms of neighbors that I've met while working out there. I saw
Okay.
that Trail Stewards is on the agenda for a little bit later. But while I'm here, I might as well just mention Ryan, who lives down on Flatiron Road.
Yeah.
Last name with a B. I don't know how to pronounce
Yeah.
it.
Ryan Bjerke.
Bjerke, yes. Very nice guy. Thanked me for the work and said he's going to be appreciating the trails. Could be worth reaching out to him as a steward. I didn't mention that. And then I met the dog walker and volunteer trail builder who is Eric.
Yes.
And I've seen he walks his dog every day.
Yeah.
And he lives in the blue tree at the bottom by the school, like the other end of Flatiron Road. And I quite delicately had the conversation with him about how efforts should be coordinated through the committee, and that there's sensitive wetlands to avoid and things like that. So he more or less got the picture, but he was pretty excited to be able to contribute to help in some way. So I suggested that maybe you guys would get in touch with them and figure out a way to coordinate efforts.
Cool. Yeah, in fact, I met him on the trails again about an hour ago now. So
Oh, cool.
he said yeah, I met somebody up here who talked to me and pointed out that the trails can't go through the wetlands. So evidently, the way you talked to him seemed perfectly. You got the message across, and he had good memories.
Okay, cool.
So,
Yeah, he said he said a couple times, "Oh, I wish I still had my ATV to be able to drive around and do trail maintenance." And I tried to imply that that wasn't going to be necessary or helpful. But he said he bought a chainsaw to be able to maintain the trails. So he's pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, I hope he's not too enthusiastic.
Right.
Gonna give Jack a heart attack over here.
Yeah.
I got the sense that he was going to be fun. You know, he appreciates knowing where the trails are, and you know, when the trails, once the trails are there and marked, I think you know, I think he's somebody who will stay on the trails. You know, he's aware of the old logging roads and regards those as trails at this point. But you know, so you guys get the rest of the trail network built out there. I don't see Eric as being somebody who's going to be a hassle for us. I think he's going to be probably more helpful than anything else. So and enthusiastic about the woods. I take that as a really good sign.
Right, for sure. What he said was he put in that connector because his dog's getting old and he wants a shorter loop to walk with her. So I think once we have some more loops, he'll appreciate that.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, I figured I would relay that to you, and I think that's all I got.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and let me know if people want to get together, and we can coordinate on some dates if there's interest.
Awesome. Yeah, we have outreach and volunteer engagement on our agenda tonight, and I'm anxious to get to our guest. So I think let's just dive into the ecology. At this point, we can get to the outreach stuff afterwards.
Cool. I'll probably stay on and watch.
Fantastic. Okay. Great. Then
Take it away.
take it away. You're next.
So, okay. Well, so just by way of a brief introduction here, I guess I'll say my name's Matt Peters. I'm an independent botanist and ecologist based over in Woodbury. So I work projects kind of across northern New England, mostly Vermont and New Hampshire, northern parts of New Hampshire. And primarily for a variety of different conservation clients and municipalities and groups of that sort for projects that contribute to biodiversity and land conservation in various ways. So that's in a nutshell quickly who I am and what I do. I think before I dive into all the slides here, I just put together a few quick slides to sort of touch on some of the highlights of things that I found in the course of my ecological assessments for the forest. But I hope this will primarily be a discussion, driven by your questions and particular interests. So, and not, me doing a long slide talk here. So with that, I think maybe I'll just dive into these. So a view of the lower part of the Elmore branch here. Hopefully you've all had a chance to explore a little bit down into that gorgy section, which is pretty neat. Bedrock confined reach. And then, okay, so I just, first couple slides, I can little bit hard to see the legend in here, but I through the maps from the reports, I assume everyone's had a chance to see the reports that I put together for TPL on the two different pieces here. And so they were, I did the original piece, the Whitcomb-Bedell track back in 2021, is when I did the field work. And so just to touch on some of the highlights coming out of this, the property is primarily cloaked in common, what we call matrix forest types, northern hardwood forest, hemlock northern hardwood forest, red spruce northern hardwood forest. So, things that are extremely widespread across the landscape. And then it's sort of peppered with smaller features that are maybe of a little bit more unusual in some cases, or just small scale features of other common community types in some cases. Screen. So I guess some of the main ones to point. Well, I should first step back. Is everyone familiar or comfortable with the concept of natural community types? That's kind of a primary lens that I use in this kind of work. So natural communities are their way of looking at and describing the land that encompasses the plants and animals that live there, the physical features of the landscapes, the bedrock and soils, the topography and hydrology, all those aspects, and as well as the sort of ecological processes along the landscape. And kind of rolls those things all together and looks for basically repeating patterns in those things across the landscape. And so there's a state classification for natural community types. So you can think of these habitat types would be another way to think of them, although a habitat is kind of a broader word that can mean many different.
So it's species and soil,
basically
and
the
processes.
the biotic, the living components of the landscape, the abiotic components, soils and the bedrock and so forth, the climate as well, and then the ecological process. So those three elements all rolled together. So Vermont has a classification of natural community types. There are about 100 of them recognized across the state. So these are sort of recurrent patterns you see across the landscape. And so that becomes a tool then for understanding the relative commonness or rarity and conservation significance of different pieces of the landscape. So that's why it's a great tool both from a conservation planning standpoint and also from a management standpoint then, because it knowing what the natural community type is tells you a lot of information that could be relevant to different land uses or sensitivity of a place to different land uses, things like the hydrology and what the soils might be like, or the depth of the soils, or bedrock, and so forth.
So you said there's like around 100
Yeah,
recognized types?
Yep.
Usually see?
Yep, and if folks aren't familiar with it, there's a great, very accessible book, Woodland, Wetland, Wildland, as Vermont's Guide to Natural Communities. It's aimed at a general audience, not a highly technical audience or anything. So that's a really great book to check out if you're not familiar with it. As an introduction, there's a description of each individual natural community type, and that's sort of the guiding classification that I use for this. And then so within that classification system, each type gets it's called an S rank, or a rarity rank, basically how rare or common that is across the entire Vermont landscape. So that's kind of the basis for a system of evaluating the significance of a particular examples of each community type on the landscape. So in the case of this part of the property, none of the individual natural community occurrences came out as what we call state significant. So there's a kind of a set protocol for evaluating communities that encompasses the rarity of the type, size, the current condition that it's in, how has it been extensively disturbed by human activities, or is it really pristine kind of thing, as well as kind of the larger landscape context around it. So you kind of roll all that together and you come up with an evaluation, a sort of a scoring of whether it meets this standard of state significance. So none of the examples in this tract sort of met that threshold. We did have some on the other tract that we'll get to in a moment. But there are four of the natural community types are what are considered uncommon in kind of the broader statewide perspective. Some of those uncommon ones are actually this big, I've got, can you see that little cursor there? This big magenta blob there is lowland spruce fir forest, which is can be quite a widespread community type. A lot of our examples have had extensive history of forest management, so the condition of many of them is kind of less pristine. So even though it can be a pretty expansive community type, it's considered uncommon in the larger picture, kind of a more northern spruce fir dominated community. Let's see, we've got little areas along the Elmore branch. These yellowish pieces down here are alluvial shrub swamp, which is a riparian or streamside natural community of stream deposited alluvial soils, usually dominated by alder or other shrubs, and a mixture of kind of open and shrubby areas. We've got, let's see, what are the other ones in this piece? That's right, the northern hardwood seepage forest up here is, you can think of this as like a seep that, I'm sure everyone's seen seeps in the woods, but seepage forest is basically a really big example of that, where you actually end up with kind of a mosaic of upland and wetland conditions on the ground. So kind of too big to just sort of encompass as one little seepage run. It's a mosaic kind of condition.
So that's considered relatively uncommon?
It's considered uncommon on the whole landscape. It's actually a community type that was only relatively recently recognized in our classification system, because previously people sort of said, well, maybe it's really just this kind of fine scale mixture of northern hardwood forest and seeps. And we sort of realized, now it's really a thing unto itself, where you get this kind of mosaic upland wetland mixture kind of condition. But it is somewhat uncommon on the landscape. So, seepage forest with the alluvial shrub swamp. Oh, the vernal pool. So they're up here perched. There's a right up there. There's a very small vernal pool, and my studies on both tracks were done in the late fall, so not ideal timing to be visiting vernal pools. This particular pool, I think its hydrology is fairly marginal. I'm not sure that it's great amphibian breeding habitat. I don't think it holds water for a real long time, but it would be great to take a better look at it in the spring sometime and see what's really going on. So those four pieces are the more uncommon community types. I'd also call out this big kind of light green area in here as the riparian wet meadows here. I didn't break that out into distinct natural community types, because it's kind of this mixture, and it's probably has a history of agricultural use of parts of it, so it's a little bit in flux, I think. But basically, it's a big wet meadow that is significant as potential habitat for wood turtles in particular, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then the other piece that we'll talk about more in a moment is this a rare plant here, the trailing stitchwort, Stellaria alsine, that showed up at all these little red stars sprinkled around. And it's a plant of, cursor makes it tough. Its habitat is seeps and other kind of seepage wetlands. So groundwater discharge is what it really likes. So it's widely scattered across the site.
Is it that riparian rut swamp? Is that area particularly where the wood turtles are?
Well, it's the best piece of habitat on the tract. I mean, we can talk more about wood turtles and their preferences. Got down a couple slides, but yeah, they're a river turtle rather than a pond turtle. All of our other turtles are basically use still water habitats, but wood turtles are they live in streams, and then they go out away from the stream to forage in the upland habitat adjacent to the stream. And so they can go out quite a distance from the streams, but But riparian wetlands and the alluvial alder swamps there, or shrub swamps, it's kind of sedgy wet meadows that's great foraging habitat for them. They come back to the stream for kind of a more secure place in the water. So yeah, that's kind of the best habitat. There's even on these this little S bend here, there's kind of a gravel bar there that has some potential to be a breeding site, not confirmed. But then, you know, the lower bedrock gorgy sections. Stuck on the screen there, but not on my screen. That's strange. Anyway, the part I showed in that first slide, that's the turtles might move through there, but obviously they can't climb cliffs, so they're not going to be. That's probably not going to be their favorite place to spend.
They actually identified there on the parcel at all?
So they haven't. I didn't totally refresh on this. There is a older record of wood turtle being sighted somewhere on this lower stretch. And I don't think they have a pinpoint location, but they're animals, they move around anyway. Habitat's there, they have been sighted in that area. So there's potential there. That's definitely the
There
best.
was an article in the Harvard Gazette, last issue, on wood turtles.
Oh, really? Oh, I'll have to look for that.
Sounds like the floods are really having a big impact on it.
I would certainly worry about that. Yeah, I mean, they're right in harm's way, and they're, yeah, it can be very long lived. Just then, well, let's do sort of an overview of the other piece then, and then I've got several slides to just go through some of the other species and touch some of them. So this is a little bit hard to take in at this scale, but so the Bourne tract, a little over 400 acres. So again, it's primarily dominated by very common natural community types, northern hardwood forest, northern hardwood forest. And then sort of peppered with all these fine scale features. This was really interesting, novelty kind of terrain with all these little perched swamps and vernal pools and a lot of small unmapped drainages all down through that area. And then the cliff complex down in this section, along with the red spruce heath rocky ridge on top of the cliff. And then the river shore communities up here are sort of highlights in the diversity of the piece as a whole. So the temperate acidic cliff in here does sort of meet that threshold of state significance. Say that's it's big enough and high quality example. That's a bit more of a special spot on the property. And then again, there are 4 other uncommon natural community types. One of those is right at the top of the cliff, the red spruce heath rocky ridge. The others, there's a little piece again of a floodplain forest type up here. We'll see these in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Again, the vernal pools, there are several of them, and these are more significant vernal pools within this part of this property, and then let's go on to the next slide because it'll show more detail. Got the close up.
Did the state know that TAC existed before you found it?
No.
So you were the first one to
Yeah. And
figure it out,
yep, and that's one of the primary things that I do.
and you brought it to their attention.
Yes, I believe, I'll have to go back and check this, but I think once the property had finally been acquired, then I think we did submit this to the Heritage Program. So the Vermont Natural Heritage Inventory is a part of the State Fish and Wildlife Department that manages information on rare species and significant natural community occurrences and keeps track of all that in a big database. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that I submitted this to them. I can double check that. There was quite a time lag involved. But.
wonder if your Zoom has been, yeah, I bet your Zoom has the focus rather than.
Yeah, maybe so, yeah. So then this is just the north end, a little bit more of a close-up of the river shore. So again, the yellow areas there. But the silver maple ostrich fern floodplain forest, small pieces, but some nice areas there. Floodplain forest, of course, have been historically cleared for agriculture, so we have a relatively small amount of them left that has sort of natural vegetation. There are some small pieces of river shore outcropping here, this section, and up here, and those two areas in particular are where many of the rare species that in this tract are found, and again, there are a total of 16 rare plants. A slight update from the report. One of the rare mosses that I had identified, I went back and looked at it again subsequent to putting out the report and changed my mind about what it is. And it's not what I initially thought it was. So subtract one of them.
Not as rare as.
Yeah, it was a more common species. Thanks to our microscope work and so forth.
How robust are these rare species? Are they something that comes and goes, or are they, if you leave them alone, they're gonna stay? Like they're not affected by flooding and mass.
Yeah, well, so let me show you some images here, just to maybe give a little bit of a sense. Here, we'll jump ahead to, since we were just talking about these. So there you go. So this is just to give you a little bit of a visual. It's hard to do this. Mosses, of course, are small, so it's hard to convey with photos. But in this case, these are things that are relative habitat specialists. That's why they're rare. And there are some sections of more calcareous bedrock on this particular river shore outcrops, and that's why these particular species are there. It's because it's calcium is an important plant nutrient that is associated with heightened diversity across a whole range of different ecosystems and natural communities, and often has rare species as a component of that. Just fewer places on the landscape that have the right kind of conditions for these plants to be able to grow because they have more particular nutrient requirements, higher soil pH, things like that that they need. So not that the names will mean much to you, but for better or worse, mosses and liverworts don't really have common or English names. People make them up, but they're not really in common circulation. So this one is a patch of Timea megapolitana. This sort of bluish green one in the middle is the Selenia. This kind of light greenish one over here is actually a liverwort, a leafy liverwort, so Wolcott minor. And one above it here, this is called Hyophila involuta, a small moss that is very particular to calcareous river shore outcrop habitats. That's basically the only kind of habitat that it lives in. Some of the others can be on other kinds of calcareous cliff settings. And then in the middle here, this is actually not a moss or a liverwort. It's what's called a vascular plant, a higher plant. It's a small annual spike sedge that there's a couple of uncommon species along this part of the river shore. So to get to your question, these are here because of this particular type of habitat that's there, and so they should be relatively stable over time. The spike sedge here, that's an annual, so it's going to move around in its precise location over time, but as long as the basic habitat type is there, it would be expected to still be in the system somewhere coming back from the seed bank every year. But in terms of the mosses and liverworts, they should be relatively constant components. They're not something you would expect to be here one year.
Yeah, it's not something that just showed up one year and then you never see it.
No, I mean, certainly they're vulnerable. They have some level of vulnerability to the kind of floods we're having now. You know, they do have some adaptation for that. I mean, especially the Hyophila, this one, I mean, it lives below the high water mark of our rivers and streams. That is its home. So it definitely has some adaptation to dealing with ice scour and sediment loading and all that kind of stuff. And what's the limit of its tolerance? No, we don't really know. Is the honest answer to that. But yeah, they should be fairly stable components of the habitat. And I guess maybe to get to some of the questions you were raising earlier, Gordon, you know, many of these things are in some ways self-protecting in terms of where they live. A number of these are on basically vertical outcrops, and some of the others on the temperate acidic cliff. There's a number of other of these mosses where, you know, unless you've got rock climbers going in there and, you know, cleaning routes and scouring all the vegetation and soil away, someone walking up to the base of the cliff isn't really going to hurt them, anything like that. You know, recreational use of some of these sites, I think, can be perfectly compatible with protection of the rare species as well. So just to give you a few.
While we're on the topic, it's like the calcareous outcrops on the river. Do you have a sense of how many of those, you know, between say Hardwick and Morrisville, or is there 50 of them, or, you know, too many to count, or is there only one or two?
Right, that's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for that, other than to say I think if you look at the bedrock mapping, it's predominantly not calcareous bedrock. It's predominantly acidic, so most of it would not be good habitat for most of these. I think there were just localized sort of seams that are either have more calcareous layers of rock in them or are funneling. Groundwater can kind of concentrate and funnel mineral enrichment kind of through the seams that it moves out. So that can be a reason that you get a localized enrichment that provides habitat for things like this. So my sense is that no, there would not be a large number, but really it would take someone, you know, traveling that whole stretch and looking carefully, and that just had been done.
Would there be more of them like east of the, I understand there's kind of a fault line or a change in the soil types, that, you know, like Lake Alligo sits in the middle of it and runs downwards, or Woodbury Mountain Range, so that maybe more to the east?
There certainly could be for some of these, because there is more calcareous bedrock in general. You know, that it has to coincide with, you know, exposures of the bedrock in a river shore setting for some of these. You know, honestly, we don't, for many of these, we don't know exactly why they show up where they show up. You know, calcareous bedrock is one component of what they need, but there are other factors at play there as well, and don't really have a firm understanding of why they are in a particular place. And I should say, particularly with things like the mosses and liverworts here, you know, our understanding of the relative abundance or rarity of these things on the landscape is constantly growing, but it's still not by any means comprehensive. You might not be surprised to learn there aren't that many people that can, you know their mosses out there on the landscape. And so, you know, to understand the rarity of these things, we're looking back at, you know, museum specimens that have been collected over the past couple hundred years to understand, you know, how many places do these exist on our landscape? And in some cases, maybe only one or two other places that are known. Are those the only places in all of Vermont where they grow? Maybe, or maybe not. It's going to just take more time. People learn what's here. And you know, New England is relatively well botanized, so we actually have good information compared to what most places have. But it's still far less than, you know, omniscience about where everything is.
So, you know, related question is, as I look at the 730 acres of the town forest, and you've done a pretty thorough examination of it. If we look around, you know, the 5, 6, 10, you know, 10 towns and counties around us, how much of, you know, what other parcels of land have had a similar kind of evaluation?
Yeah, I'd have to actually like look at a map to give you a very concrete answer to that. A lot of the state lands have had some level of this kind of work done, particularly the natural community mapping piece of it. So to the extent that you're encompassing, state forest lands and so forth, that some of that has been done. It's not always people that do this sort of work always have, a reasonable degree of botanical knowledge, but they don't necessarily have the breadth and depth of knowledge that I do. And keep my own horn, just sort of the fact. So they would probably walk right past these while mapping the natural communities in very simple ways. So the vast majority of the landscape hasn't been studied in this level of detail. That helps you understand. So
how long did this take?
Each of these, let's see, I'd have to look back. I think I spent about 3 days on the Bourne tract and 2, I think, on the Wicked-Meadow. I'd have to double check that. It's in the reports.
Yeah. 3 full days, 2 full days.
Yep.
Getting out, walking around.
Yeah. So then I just wanted to give you a few other visuals to, again, it's obviously hard to provide visuals for tiny things. So this is over at the temperate acidic cliff. So here's the cliff kind of in the background behind these hardwoods, and you can see the spruce of the red spruce heath rocky ridge up on top there. And then down in some of the cracks at the base of the cliff, there are a couple of different rare mosses again. This is a O'Brien. And there's literally only a couple of other places that's been found in the state at this point. I'll say that there couldn't be others, but that's all we know of so far. This one over here is Andrea rothii, Roth's rock moss, these little black tufts. So these both grow in areas where there's seepage that comes down the rock intermittently, and probably some calcareous enrichment there as well, although it's overall an acidic cliff. So wanted to touch on this one. This is actually one of the more widespread rare species. This is actually a fern, believe it or not. It's a very strange fern in our flora. You wouldn't look at this. These 2 images are through my dissecting microscope, so magnified probably 30 to 40 times. You would look at this and say, "Oh yeah, sure, that's a fern." This has a really bizarre life cycle that only exists in this kind of minute moss-like life stage, and it grows in dark rock crevices, like down at the base of this outcrop. And this is a case where our knowledge has been relatively rapidly evolving for this species. It was previously thought to be quite rare across the Vermont and New England landscape, and I only learned how to find it, identify it, recognize it in the last couple of years. This was actually the first site that I found myself for this species, and then subsequently I found it at a couple of dozen more sites around the state, and it just turned out people have been walking right past it, because of course you would walk right past it. You need a flashlight and to know what you're looking for. It turns out it's so the rarity rank of this has been changed. Now we think it's uncommon on a statewide kind of level, but it's certainly much more abundant than we previously knew, even just back when I initially did this research.
Interesting. Yeah. I was trying to figure out what this was and did a little bit of research, and I wondered if just this side of the property line. So the property basically between us and the edge of the Dell property is also becoming town property.
Oh, okay.
Thanks to the FEMA buyouts and for the house that's down here. And I think there may be another significant population of this one, this one.
Cool.
Basically, just this side of the property line.
Yeah. I mean, this, go back to the map, I found it sprinkled at many outcrops around the property. It was interesting. And how it gets around is one of the mysteries around this little plant as well, because it never makes seeds or spores. Of course, it never makes seeds, it's a fern, it never makes spores, like most of our ferns do. So how does it get around? Some kind of little vegetative fragments that travel probably on air currents or something like that, but it's kind of a mystery. Yeah. So anyway, so that it's back. Just to give you visuals on a couple of these others. So this is the trailing stitchwort from the Dell property. So here, this is if you're familiar with chickweed as a weed of your garden, maybe, or so forth, is a rarer relative, trailing stitchwort. It kind of has this bluish green color, little tiny white flowers, and kind of a sprawling trailing habitat or habit. And then its habitat is these kind of cold seepages. So,
is there any way to zoom in on that picture on the right? And like, would you be able to pick it out at that scale? Or, larger scale than like, so super zoomed in like you are?
Let's see if I can. Sure, how to zoom in on this. How to make that work.
How tall does the plant get?
It can get up to probably less than
It
a
would
foot.
be obvious if you were
Yeah,
on the edge of a seat like that.
yeah, you could see if it's growing in a dense patch, which it sometimes does when it's happy. Yeah, it would form something noticeable. Yeah, in fact, there are places I've seen, big patches in the right habitat that, size of this table. But nothing that extensive here. But it was widely dispersed around different seeps. And there's some a little bit of uncertainty around, is this really something that's rare, or is there a chance that it was introduced to our region far enough back in history that it sort of seemed like it was something rare on the landscape, but actually it's an introduced species that's slowly been spreading more widely across the landscape. And we've sort of wondered about that because this one actually, we're finding more and more of it, and it seems as though it seems to be spreading, which is not pattern you usually see for rare species. So it's raised some questions in our mind about what's really going on, and you sort of run into the limits of historical knowledge about these things. So a little bit of a question mark there around it, but it is still regarded as a rare state. And just to.
What time of year does it flower?
Well, this picture was taken in October. Is that right? That doesn't seem right. That's when I did my assessment to wasn't it? It grows successively throughout the season, so it can start blooming fairly early in the summer, and then it sort of has this indeterminate growth habit where the tips of the trailing vine or stems keep growing out and can bloom successively. So fairly prolonged flowering period throughout the season. I'm misremembering the Bedall piece I surveyed earlier in the season. It was the Bourne piece that I did late in fall. Getting mixed up. Then just to circle back to the wood turtles, we already touched on some of this, but just to give you some visuals, they're pretty distinctive turtles. If you've never seen one, they have this great kind of orangey coloration on their undersides, and their bottom shell, the plastron, is yellow with these real distinct black blotches. And they're this one, the top shell, this one's a little bit worn with age, but they have this sort of sculpted look relative to our other turtles. Snapping turtles can have sort of a similar look. I can sort of make out almost concentric rings or ridges in the plates of that shell. It's characteristic of the species, and as I say, it's our one river associated turtle. And their lifespan and life cycle is actually fairly similar to humans. These can live to be 80, 100 years old, and they don't start reproducing until they're about 20 years old. So that it's amazing, and it also unfortunately makes them vulnerable to various stressors, everything from being hit by cars or hanging equipment to unfortunately illegal collection poaching for the pet trade is one of the threats to the species because they are colorful and relatively desired as a pet. But that can have real serious implications for their populations. So, yeah, and again, there's habitat there, not a real recent documentation, but they have been cited. So I think those were all slides that I made. I want to just primarily talk further about some of the questions about it. Go to maps again if you want. Cool.
I mean, from my perspective, sorry, it's late in the day and I've had a long, stressful, today's workday was a squeeze. To me, the big question is and I can't help myself from going into really big questions like, recognizing that 10,000 years ago, we were under 2 miles of ice. And that our climate and our habitat and whatever we have here is in my view, always this evolving, ongoing process. And so I don't like to see the wild chervil on the side of the roads or take just to pick one example, not to mention emerald ash borer and all the rest of it. Or what's striking to me actually is looking at tree species. The elm trees that used to be around when I grew up, for instance, and so I look at these tree species as charismatic megafauna almost. Seeing the way the beach are suffering, et cetera. So from that perspective, I'm sensitive to, I see something like rare plants and think, oh, protect it. Then I start to think about it and I say, well, everything there's so much change. There's the fact that we don't have any old growth forests. Right. And so whatever we're seeing, most of what we're seeing is this ongoing process of hopefully increasing diversity and integration. Humans being part of that landscape and part of that process. So our puzzle as a stewardship committee is that we have this little piece. The 700-acre little piece within this broader range, and I'm trying to think how to focus this down to a specific question that's your area of expertise as a botanist. But so maybe I'm just trying to toss it over to you within that context of ongoing change. What do you see as the trends for the way this ecosystem is evolving, and what can we do to be good stewards in the light of those trends?
It's a big question. Well, I guess what angle to tackle that from? Well, I guess one thing I would bring out that's maybe a little bit of a contrast between the two pieces, the two tracks involved here, as certainly some differing land use history, and you see the Beddle piece, especially to the east of the road. It's
It's farm roads, comes,
The north-south, one that goes up the Elmwood Range.
oh, yeah, the East Elmwood
Yeah,
Road.
yeah.
Yes.
There certainly has been cleared historically and reforested, and so you've got some different dynamics there relative to, I think, most of the Bourne tract and upper part of to the Meadow tract to the west of the Elmer Branch. Those areas, much more rugged terrain. It's possible that parts of that area was cleared for pasture or something like that, but I think much of that probably has been continuous forest. I mean, certainly managed forest, but continuous forest. And so those are really different land use histories and trajectories. And so you see that play out in terms of, I guess, maybe the stability of the plant communities that are there to some degree. Certainly acknowledging some of the stressors that you mentioned, things that have wiped out entire tree species or greatly reduced their abundance on the landscape. But the northern hardwood forest of the Bourne tract or the hemlock northern hardwood forest there, those are relatively stable community types. They're going to have a relatively stable mixture of species there. With the caveat of climate change that's upon us. And, there's all sorts of modeling around what's going to happen with that. But there's still a lot that we don't know. It's, one thing we learned from looking back in time at historical climate change since deglaciation is to realize that everything moves around independently on the landscape. Like you look back at the distributions of different tree species on the landscape over time, and hemlock and beech that very commonly grow together in our forests today grew in completely separate parts of the continent several thousand years ago. I don't have all the details right in my head, but their ranges were basically non-overlapping. And so which is just to illustrate that it's going to be a more complex change than things sort of like steadily marching north or something like that. There's going to be kind of this reshuffling of the deck that's, I think, going to be very hard to predict with a degree of accuracy. And so, not to go too far off down that tangent, but in terms of what the ongoing evolution of the landscape is going to be, there's a ton of question marks there, but I think there's also a lot of stability and resistance to change in particularly some of those parts of the landscape that don't have as much history of extensive disturbance and changing land use. So, I don't know if that helps.
So one thing, in terms of actionable stuff, one of the things that I'm hearing is the less disturbance, the greater the resilience.
Yeah, I think that's usually the case. And certainly, well, at this point, there's not a lot of invasive species issues on the properties. Certainly, disturbance usually creates openings for invasives to come in if there's a seed source anywhere in the area. So that's definitely something to balance. I mean, not by any means saying, we haven't had a discussion about like what are your specific management objectives for the property, like. Is timber harvesting part of the plan, or is it all recreational uses or sugaring, or it's not that any of those are incompatible with the property or anything like that. But certainly in terms of disturbance, yeah, invasives should certainly be something that you're thinking about if there are activities that lead to more disturbance. Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess to circle back to one of the questions you had earlier, kind of balancing the recreational uses with protection of rare species, or considering like how much protection is needed. I think, as I was alluding to, I think many of the rare plants on the property are relatively self-protecting in terms of the places that they grow, and they're kind of microhabitats. In these rocky places, or the weft ferns in dark holes in the rock, like the main threat to those would be anything that changes the humidity environment around them. Actually, is going to be important. that obviously water is important to plants, and so that translates into humidity as well for small plants. So that would be like, if you go and harvest all the trees right next to it, that's going to change the humidity environment right there. So if you were to do forest management, that would be something to think about, is trying to maintain islands of intact forest canopy, kind of buffering them in that way. But it doesn't mean that it's incompatible with any harvesting. Like that. And I think recreational uses is right there too. As long as you're not, trails aren't substantially creating big canopy gaps or changing the way water moves over an area around one of these plants. I don't really see there being a great conflict there in most cases. At that level, you always have to think about the particulars but trying to think about it in a little bit more broad brush way. I think protection is also very compatible with recreational use, and that's actually the fact that so much of the property is spanned by common sort of matrix forest types is great in terms of not having sort of restrictions or things to worry about damaging, because those common forest types are amenable to a wide range of uses and still kind of conserving their more generalist functions as habitat.
Cool. How do you see it from a sort of a standpoint of it's, from what I understand, it's kind of medium age, not a lot of old growth type characteristics. Do you ever think about or work with active type management to bring a more diverse, more old growth type of situation into a forest?
Well, I think particularly some of the upper parts of the Bourne Tract do have some relatively mature hardwood stands in them. So I think, if you have objectives around advancing or developing more old growth characteristics, I mean, a lot of that does just require time and leaving it alone. I mean, there are folks at UVM, Bill Keaton, who've done research on sort of like, are there ways to speed up the development of old growth characteristics through, things like pulling down trees, creating coarse woody debris and so forth. And so there are some potential strategies that could go hand in hand with some kind of active management, harvesting some timber, or I guess it wouldn't necessarily have to be in conjunction with a harvest, but typically would be for getting equipment out there. So there are some strategies that you could use there. Honestly, a forester would probably be better at getting at that than I would be. But there are a lot of great sort of structural pieces of a mature forest up there, especially on that Bourne piece where it's really rugged terrain already. There's a lot of sort of pit and mound microtopography and some good woody debris in places, because there are a fair number of larger diameter mature, especially sugar maple, as I recall. So I think there are some of those pieces on the Bedell piece, especially to the east of the Elmore Branch. That, as I'm saying, it has more of this history of agricultural use and having grown from that. So maybe there would be more of a role for active forest management to influence the species composition or help creation of snags and coarse woody debris and things like that. There's probably more opportunity in those parts of the property that have more of a history of past use, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just sort of curious where your field of expertise in botany sort of dovetails with forestry or I guess trees. I mean, you're a botanist, so that encompasses
trees and plants,
trees, and then by extension wildlife. I mean, just kind of curious how it all kind of, how a specialist kind of looks at a broader landscape in relation to wildlife and just in forest, in a forest landscape. And I mean, yeah, it's just kind of interesting to me. And I'm just, looking how dots are connected. And I guess, do you look at a forest like this in light of how you could manipulate or change it, or are you just kind of just interested in what's there now, and that's more?
I mean, with this type of rapid ecological assessment approach, I mean, I'm primarily going out there to document and discover what the current conditions are on the landscape, and describe that, because it's essentially undescribed, and so that's different from what, say, a forester would do when they go out and get to know a property, certainly. I'm not in this kind of rapid assessment approach. I'm not primarily focused on any particular species or any particular type of wildlife habitat. That it's a more wide-ranging look at the landscape to just see what else is there. So, yeah, I mean, I do have that botanical specialty, but I try to have a little bit broader lens as well.
Yeah. Is the beech tree going to survive the leaf disease?
Yeah, I mean, it's really taking it in the teeth. I mean, one thing after another. It's hard to say.
Could have a big effect on a lot of Vermont, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, with warming conditions, hemlock woolly adelgid, there's a litany of things coming for many of our common tree species. Yeah.
How about your thoughts on treating ash trees against the borer with?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a strategy that in some places, I think doing it's insecticide treatment, that it can make sense. I mean, it's obviously it's costly to treat individual trees, but there are circumstances where I think it can even make financial sense. But usually that's like close to dwellings and infrastructure and things like that. Like you're not going to go out and like treat all the ash trees out in the woods kind of thing. It's not going to be practical. You have to redo it every couple of years, even every year, as my understanding. Yeah, I mean, I think that the long-term hope there is through genetic resistance or from the ash trees or biocontrol of the insects directly. And those are obviously longer-term propositions. And so now,
Don't happen so fast.
yeah, there's a lot of change.
So it seems like there's a small percentage of beech trees that stay healthy. Can you comment on that? Is that within your area? Is that?
I don't. I'm not a beech bark disease expert by any means. I certainly see that as well. That you run across healthier individuals, and I think there's kind of a spectrum from things that look like really terrible or just outright are dead to trees that look virtually pristine when you look at their trunks and the evidence of obvious disease. And so I think there must be some spectrum of genetic resistance, but I'm not up on particular sort of research around that. What's going on?
Okay. Yeah. Kind of curious because it's neat. We've got a handful. You can think of a few individual specimens on the hillside up here that are beautiful trees and in pretty good shape and being surrounded by a lot of diseased trees.
Right, so that it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly seems like there's got to be some kind of resistance going on there. And it's a great reminder of what we've lost in a way. Those trees can be like.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Two other questions I have in my mind. One of them is how do you have a sense of how similar or different this piece of property is? As I'm thinking about the New England Wilderness Trust land through Woodbury and you know, it's, well, from here down to Montpelier, down to Worcester anyway, down to Eagle Ledge.
Yeah.
There's a lot of woods, and is this kind of a special little corner, or is this representative of the whole space? Can you tell?
I think probably a mix. I mean, there's a lot of ground involved in those preserves, and I certainly haven't seen all of it by any means, but I've done a fair bit of rambling on Woodbury Mountain. Buffalo Mountain a bit. And so there's definitely some commonalities. I think I'm trying to remember bedrock mapping. I think there's some of the bedrock maps or bedrock units are the same or very similar between the areas. So you've got certainly a lot of the hardwood forest is as the matrix, and much of it being sort of a somewhat enriched, very sugar maple dominated form of northern hardwood forest is similar between both places, along with some of the more rugged shallow to bedrock topography and extensive pit and mound topography. This is definitely so yeah, I think there's a lot that's in common, and then you've got these little hotspots of diversity in the community forest here that are not that there's nothing like that elsewhere, but they're special places. Yeah, I just call out when we touched on it briefly, but the Red Spruce Heath Rocky Ridge on top of the cliff there. I mean, it's a really neat area in general, and that's a particularly interesting example of that community type. It's fairly small in the scheme of things, so it didn't kind of come out, didn't meet that sort of threshold for state significance, but really a neat place and unusual for, you know, it's up on top of this cliff. It's a very dry setting, and yet it has this really deep organic soil, which was, I don't think I'd really seen that in that kind of landscape setting before that site. I was telling Jack the other night, I actually just last week ran into another site that's hemlock dominated hemlock forest, but very similar kind of phenomenon where it's dry, rocky, very ledgy area. But with these deep upland organic soils. Usually organic soils are associated with wetland habitats because the organic matter doesn't decay because of being saturated. And so to accumulate that depth of organic soil in what's got to be, you know, largely a dry setting, it's just a relatively unusual condition, I would say, from everything that I've seen across the state. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery to me on this, actually, like how that happens. I think, you know, it's acidic being conifer litter and probably quite dry much of the time, but so it's just slowly accumulating there.
Yeah. I wonder if that spot is more wet just due to the larger topography around it. Like it's a high point, but it's you know, it's not
certainly has a ridge top.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of higher ridges. It's sort of protected in that bowl space, and
Yeah.
you know, with the river and so forth. Maybe it gets a lot of precipitation.
It may. I'd love to get back there sometime and look at it in detail. Yeah,
We brushed in the trail, so you can't take your motorcycle up.
Is that what it was? That a motorcycle or mountain?
I think so. Yeah.
I thought you had said
Yeah.
there was somebody.
The neighbors, there's neighbors close by that are actually well known for making trails, and a lot of people that are well known for their biking. And I suspect that it saw a lot more use before the recent forest harvest on the Horn parcel.
Okay.
I suspect that, well, and that was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, before. Okay. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure you saw the
Yeah.
indications. I think that trail probably got a lot more use before that.
Sure.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
It's you know, it has all the markings of a moto trail, not actually a bike trail.
Yeah.
It would take bikers a long time to make that much impact.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
That's one thing. Have you ever walked around in the area around Katie's Falls? It's like what I call Katie's Falls, which is where the mountain bike trails are, but behind Katie's Falls Nursery and.
No, I've been to the nursery, but I haven't really explored or back in there. Yeah.
There's some places on the rocks back there, close down by the river, actually, that remind me of the land, it has a similar feel, to some degree, the depth of soil and the amount of moss and lichen and stuff that's going on the ground.
Yeah.
The other place that actually was just a couple of days ago, this was sometimes the first one.
Which bears you
These
place names.
There's one here in Wolcott.
Okay.
Right, yeah, not the bear swamp down in Middlesex.
Yes, I know there's one.
It was, my dad used to take some students down there a lot. So, that's that, if you're interested, I'd love to show you around with her.
Good place.
I think you'd enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's a pretty unique place.
Neat.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And then you've spent some time throughout the property, and you've got a good broad range property contains. Have you identified areas that might be good teaching moments for the elementary school age kids that don't necessarily bring a lot of curious but maybe heavy-footed minds into this particularly sensitive area? So I think that's one of the things that we're interested in developing with the school. And what have you noticed some areas that might have enough kind of mystery to them that need to be decoded that would help maybe inspire kids to look deeper into the forest?
Yeah, that's a great question with the school right there.
Maybe not top of mind, but if upon review or further thought, if you can think of areas, certainly be open with it. We have some great educators there that are looking for ideas.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things to look at is always, thinking about changes in the land and the land use history. And so that actually the parts of the property that are closest to the school are some of those with, I think, more history of more intensive land use, probably cleared in the past and then reforested. So maybe it doesn't pinpoint it at an exact spot, but just as sort of a broader lens to think about that. Sense of curriculum, you might be able to even ferret out some older landscape photos that show that would sort of help illustrate change over time on the landscape and helping folks think about just how the landscape has changed really significantly over the last few hundred years even. Particular places. I mean, certainly the Elmore Branch in general is just a fascinating diversity of habitats from the gorge section down at the lower end up through the much more open meadowy kind of wet meadow area. There again, I think you've got some land use history of agricultural use in the mix of what you're seeing there today. So it's not all kind of in natural condition. It's a mix of sort of what it would do on its own and what people have done there in the past. But yeah, I mean, rivers are always just fascinating for their dynamic kind of nature. So there's lots to explore there, certainly. I think there might be, again, I don't know what all your objectives as a group are, but
Conservation and recreation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that might come to mind for at least parts of those open riparian meadows is there restoration work to be done in any of that?
And please expand on that. That's actually something we've been talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, even since our last meeting. come across some more information about people who are talking about restoring rivers to more, natural states that tended to be chalked up with logs and so on, as for the impact on flood control, among other things. And we've talked about trying to increase the shade cover on the river to the east. So that's an area we're really interested in.
Yeah, and then, parts of that, it's mostly open right now. It's mostly, there's relatively little woody vegetation in that whole stretch of stream. And I think that's, a mixture of both land use history of clearing and in part its natural condition. I think, of course, I only spent a few hours exploring that area. So that, with that caveat, much of that I think is relatively naturally open sedge meadow type wetland. So while at first glance you might look at it and think, oh, this must have all been cleared and we should plant trees all over this whole thing. That's probably not necessarily the most suitable approach to it, because I think it is naturally open sedge meadow. That said, there are sections of it that are clearly, well, there's some sections that are open now that are fully upland habitat, so they would have been forested. They were historically cleared, clearly. And then there are some areas closer to the channel where the as I recall anyway, the mixture of what the soil type is like and what the current vegetation is suggests, that it was probably more extensive alluvial shrub swamp, more alders, maybe some floodplain forest up into there. So there might be some opportunities for helping boost the woody vegetation back on parts of that. Certainly you could encourage reforestation of the more clearly upland parts of it. You probably have to look at it in more detail. It's possible that there was some past ditching across that meadow. There's some tributaries, streams that come down off the steeper slopes and across that to the Elmore branch. And so to the extent that you can tell if something had been ditched, there might be, some kind of opportunity for doing ditch plugging or something to sort of restore the wetland hydrology there. I think that would take more careful examination in the field to see if that really is a direction that makes sense to go. Yeah, it's my off the cuff thoughts about that, having, like I said, spent a little bit of time actually looking at that particular section, but and with keeping in mind that turtle habitat piece. So
the wood turtles are going to like, so they want some open fields or?
I think they'll use a range of different upland habitats and riparian wetland habitats. The biggest thing there, I think, would just be, being if there was equipment involved, being careful about that. Probably not a place that it would make sense to get into trying to create some sort of artificial breeding habitat that's been done in some cases, or create kind of sand or gravel mound type habitats to simulate nesting areas that they would use. But, it's probably not. I can put you in touch with someone who's very focused on turtles, actually, Kylie. Yeah, sure. If you're interested in pursuing that wood turtle piece more,
I think there's also, I'm not an expert, don't even think about it all that much, but I guess shade is good for trout and, generally the animals living in the water itself. It's like more natural for the animals. So that's part of what we've been thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. And so that, like I say, I think there is opportunity for some restoration of woody vegetation along the Elmore Branch. Though I do think much of it probably would naturally have been more shrub than tree, right, along the immediate river corridor there, just based on what that area looks like to me.
Yeah, cool. That's good to know. Yeah. I think those are the things that I was thinking about. You know, I mean, again, my mind goes to thinking about the big picture and how does it fit into the big picture, so.
Yeah,
You know, love to take a walk in any of this part, you know, Bear Swamp or, you know, that, anywhere, however, it's.
yeah,
The Tamarack Brook and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's.
yeah, and if other, if other questions arise as you're, doing your work as a super, feel free to reach out and, particularly if there, specific questions about things that I found in relation to, management activities or recreation, trail building, and things like that. Happy to be in touch.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, any other
No,
comments?
thank you, man.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, glad to meet the group, and oftentimes I do these short-term studies for projects, and then I don't necessarily hear anything about what happens down the line. So, and it's nice to know when it's fully come to fruition and to spend time rambling around. Yes,
I think you found an audience that's hungry for your specialized knowledge.
great. To share.
Awesome.
Get you back in there.
Cool.
Thanks, and good to meet everyone.
Yeah, we didn't exactly do introductions, but I did.
Well, it wasn't a big group. I think I didn't know if I called you Dave. Roger and Dave, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
See what else is on our agenda.
All right.
Good to see you, man.
Hope you can engage in volunteers.
Yeah, I kind of had to swing and a miss on that. I love it.
You know.
I tried to gather some people, they were posting the wrong date. So I had to do the walk of shame. Unfortunately, no one showed up anyway, except Gordon. And so I didn't really have to break too many hearts. There was one person I know who was going to stop by with his son that I actually spoke with before. So I told them that we would stay, but they didn't show up the next morning. There's at least one person, or two people technically, who are interested in doing some work that I've talked to directly. But I think going back to Gordon's original idea, I guess it's time to start compiling the dedicated mailing list of volunteers. Try a different approach.
That was the front porch forum.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like on a weekend with really nice weather, approaching the end of the season, I don't think there was a lot of enthusiasm to go out and do the work as much to go out and enjoy the world.
Yeah. I don't, it seems like a good way to spend Saturday with me, but oh well.
I wasn't on the weekend myself, but yeah.
But it seems like there's an opportunity coming up, so maybe we can compile, 2, 3, 4 people who are interested, will have enough momentum to get a good chunk of work done before the frost.
I'm thinking we should actually, so here's my idea, I'd like to have kind of a recruitment drive in a sense. I'd like to start to collect a list of names to compile the mailing list, so to speak, right? And I think we could do that by posting for a few days, sort of repeated post on Front Porch Forum to drum up interest. The issue is going to be actually collecting the names and keeping the list. Almost the admin piece of it, and I'm okay at that kind of stuff when I when I sit down and focus on it, and that's good. And I'll be interested in doing that in spurts. But I think it's probably
I think it's one of those things where I don't want to do it too much because then people just get kind of lose touch. I think maybe over the course of the next 2 weeks, I'll do 4 posts, like every 4 or 5 days or
And
so.
I'm happy to make
Yeah,
posts, send out the posts or,
Yeah,
voice
we'll
messages.
just compile it on it.
It's more the, actually being responsive when somebody, gets, I think having a place of contact that, they feel recognized when they sign up. Because I'm thinking it's, front porch forum post is one thing. I think we should put a poster up maybe at the Wolcott store and maybe some other places. For myself, let's see, I went biking last weekend with a friend who went to this thing that happened at the Spruce Performing Arts Center of local people who have mountain bike pictures and stuff like that. And so my friend Chris was there, and Brooke and Mariah were there, and they were talking. And Chris and Brooke said, "Oh yeah, we're starting to work, and we're going to have this volunteer weekend." And Chris was like, "I didn't hear about it. How come I didn't know?" So. That's it,
Could design like a 3x5 mailer. We do have some budget.
Yeah.
It's been pre-authorized from the town.
Where I'm going with this is I'm thinking I'm just put handwrite on an 8x10 sheet of paper and put something up at the bike shop in Hardwick and something down to Chuck's and maybe Power Play Sports. And again, the issue is where to tell people to go to sign up. I think we need to talk to Bradley and again, I'm a digital native almost. So I think, pointing somebody to the website so we can get one of those little QR codes that they can scan with their phone and get themselves signed up. That's where my mind's going with it.
Primarily.
Right before the meeting, I just read Dennis's general newsletter that he sends out to parents. I don't know how many parents. I'm guessing at least 80% of parents read those.
Good call. Yeah.
And we're talking about primarily the dragging brush volunteer at this point, or is there more? Is there more going on?
So that's kind of transitioning to another topic, but absolutely. I'm just gonna say it, this is what I personally want. I want to see us building a trail that winds basically from right across the rail trail here or some other access point. I have another spot in mind around the corner on the rail trail. You can make a nice, more gentle climb up the hill. So there's, essentially to have an official trail that gets to the top of the hill and potentially gets out to the pond on the corn parcel. And, the primary route, well, it can go in stages, but the first stage to go up the right of way to that sort of outcrop is a knoll that it's a perfect destination for people who aren't even all that fit, right? To be able to have a destination to walk to and a bench to sit on when they get there. And then, we can branch from there. So short answer to your question though is I think there's more to do than just help insinuosity.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's that's separate from the sinuosity project.
Yeah.
Probably overlapping and transitioning into as well, right? Because we're likely going to find a motivated core of volunteers with, their own limits of availability that would likely contribute to any and all efforts moving forward. I think is the goal.
And is it just kind of walking it? I mean, I guess I've never built trails per se. It's walking it and seeing where it needs more active kind of trail building. And is that kind of?
There's a lot, there could be a whole range for how this goes. Like if you come over and walk the trails that I've got around my house, they're pretty lightly constructed, let's say. So the range between just kind of taking some lockers and some tape and flagging something for people to walk on, to put in some rocks and wet spots, or actually moving things around. Obviously, for a lot of stuff, first pass through, if the best place for a trail to go might have a log lane, but windfall or something, and so it's, a trip with a chainsaw is part of the situation. And you may remember when Brooke and Mariah did one of their first presentations, they talked about the full range from the mountain bike term, rake and ride, right? A lot of mountain bike trails, people will go around once a year with a leaf blower, and just clear the leaves and the small sticks, and the original trail construction may have scraped a few inches of the organic soil, or the duff just off the top, so that the trail is more down onto the mineral soil, or at least into the denser organic soil, and then leaf blowing it once a year. The thing, personally, what I picture on the top of the barn parcel, is like what I have around my house, or what they have. There's a really extensive trail network. I talked about this last time, down by Maple Corners, in Calais, on the ridge mark between Calais and Worcester, and I found out more about it. A lot of it, there's a couple of large landowners that have the trail building started before the acquisition of before Peter bought the 400-acre parcel that's there, but and it was sugared before that, and the new owner took out all of the sugaring lines, right? Cleared them out, and has been encouraging trail building. The one of the primary guys who does the trail building is this great individual. Actually, I had the pleasure of meeting him last weekend. Randy Allen, the Allen name that I hear, all over. I didn't actually ask him if he traces his own lineage back to Ethan and Ira, like some of these other Allens I know too. And he grew up in Worcester, and spent all of his summers helping his grandparents farm up here on Brown Hill. And the time he spent outside of Vermont was 5 years going to art school in Boston, and now he's back here, and is 10, 15 years older than I am, and builds trails and makes bridges for those trails, and custom builds the metalwork for the fasteners and the joiners on the bridges, and that's what's in place down in Calais. So the trails are not advertised in any way. There's a Calais community trail committee that has some clearly marked trails, and then there's all these other trails that just go off from them. That's the local community says their motto has been "Keep Calais mysterious." But they're constructed trails, and so what you see when you're out on these trails is they've been leaf blown, that they have enough traffic to that you can see where the trail is, and then there's these amazing places where there's this gorgeous rock work along the bottom of the ledge or across a wet area, and that's all Randy's work. But we've got lovely rocks, we've got lovely terrain, and these trails are these compared to what I see Brooke and Mariah, right? They have this tiny little excavator, but still. It's, the trail's 2 feet wide or something. And Randy's trails are 6 inches wide. And so that's what I'm thinking. So, and the way those kinds of trails, and the trails at Katie's Falls in the bike area are similar. They were not laid out as thoughtfully, I would say. They've been there a lot longer. They see, I think they see more usage, and so there's more variance in that case. And again, what I see down in Calais is exactly the model that I would like to see replicated.
I should do a field trip over there.
Yeah,
No.
I'd love to take anybody. I mean, anybody wants to bike or walk.
Might have to walk. I don't know if I can keep up with you, like.
I can go slow. I mean, and I've done 10-mile rides down there, and I have not seen the whole trail network.
Huh.
So,
Huh.
and I think they're on more acreage than our total acreage, but not by much.
So, and they're not advertised, and so it's kind of just a word of mouth.
Yeah. And they're made by volunteers with, completely by hand.
Yeah.
So the thing.
Gordon, Gordon, do you know if they're policing rogue trail building, or they're dealing with any issues of that nature, since it's so, it seems like it's a little more free form?
I would say not. I would say, this is speculation. At this point, I've talked to, I talked to Randy. He actually came up and walked around on the Bourne parcel with me. And I talked to Ram, who's another, who's done a lot of work with Randy. I can say most of them are on private property. The trail builders all know each other. And another point I would add is that in my conversations with Randy, he said, he's feeling like he's done with trail building in that area. They're pretty well saturated. And the density of trails there is much, much less than what I see at, say, Perry Hill, the Perry Hill bike area in Waterbury, or Katie's Falls, or Katie Hill, even in Stowe. It's similar to what I would say in Adams Camp in Stowe. That's sort of between Trap Family Lodge and Route 108, the mountain road. There's a lot of trails in that. There's some trails in there. It's the Calais trails are maybe a similar density as what I see in that area. I don't see evidence of anybody being particularly concerned. There are some places actually close to the road. There's some less exciting terrain where there's a lot more trails. But again, I think they may have been built by the landowners themselves.
Are the trails mapped?
I'm helping Ram with the mapping by recording my GPS tracks, but I don't think there's an official map, and they've taken some care to keep them out of like trail forks and all trails and stuff like that.
And that's probably easier.
That really helps.
I'm sorry, say again.
I was just saying that surely helps keep down rogue trail building and just general traffic in the area.
Yeah.
Easier to do on private land, probably. It's being a public piece as ours, it will be a little easier I imagine, for people to get it, to know it, and the word to get out, if that's a concern.
Yeah.
Keeping it more hidden, it will be a little harder probably here.
Well, I love the idea of a field trip for, committee members and other interested people.
Maybe in terms of keeping the trails themselves covert, doesn't really make sense in a public town forest like ours.
Yeah.
But maybe some of the artistic sensibility And the decision making in terms of, what features can be accentuated by such work might make a lot of sense here, even if we don't directly refer them back to the point of origin. It could be, if we're planning on, inviting people in, which we are anyway, it might make sense to be a point of inspiration over time and show people it doesn't have to be that it can have its own kind of regional personality to it beyond just the landscape. These kind of artisanal enhancements, can make memories which invite people back. I mean, even just like the Northern Cascades over their trail, we got washed out in the last flood. It was an area that my family gravitated towards, just doing quick hikes and snowshoeing and stuff. And then the whole northern section pretty heavily damaged, washed away. So
the one on Route 12?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a point of it's a very Instagrammable moments. But it's as populations come up, it might be good to have those moments in a public town forest as opposed to the private setting that they don't necessarily want the traffic to go to.
Yeah.
Everyone has their opinion about how much traffic want to bring to the forest. So it's kind of a hot potato, but
Yeah.
well,
there's
certainly opportunities for it.
The fact is that we have, we've got this forest which was purchased with public money. And there is, especially there's this section which is, I've commented on this many times, it's noisy already. It's right here next to town, but it's not like there's a lot of neighbors there already who are, to have a lot of trails up there, we're not impinging on a bunch of neighbors. And the accessibility for the rail trail. I mean, Maxfield, to your point, I do think that with the rail trail and proximity to town, easy parking and stuff, we are likely to get a lot more traffic than some of the other places that I'm familiar with. And I think that's a good thing, but I do think any trail design and trail work has to take that into account. We have to be really careful in terms of designing around water and designing for certain level of usage. It's right here, and it's a beautiful place for people to get involved with, and I'm so excited to get it opened up.
It's amazing. Having the right landscape enhancement is really pivotal to young minds, to really building those memories. Because just walking my own kids through the woods, trees and trees and rocks and trees and trees, but you've got a really memorable landscape feature. You have a really memorable piece of public art that you wouldn't have seen unless you went out there. A good example is most of you probably haven't been here, but I know the Berkeley Marina, they have all these shoreline trails, but up in the middle, up in the hill, there's this big stone circle, natural, artisanally made sundial. And my kids spent a lot of time there growing up, and it's just one of those things that just taps right into the memory. And then all the flood of everything else, how much they love that place and how emotionally attached they get to that place. It's really good to have anchor points like that.
So kind of bringing the conversation back around volunteers and stuff, the idea that's cooking up in my mind is to figure out a way to collect the information, right, and make sure that we can have robust contact, have an alive community of people that might be engaged, and then start to do some outreach. For me, it's in the biking community, right? Some of the bike shops and stuff like that. I think there's also room for backcountry skiers and stuff. I think again, this north facing slope down to the river has all kinds of opportunity for ski stuff. there's a lot of overlap between the bike and the ski community as well. But I think if we start to get people who are, interested in that, it gives us a community to draw from. And then when, we need to put out a call to help Brooke and Mariah on the weekends, we might have 50 people in a core communication thing, and 5 of them might actually show up. So that's kind of what I'm challenging for. So that said, if you guys are all in agreement, I think I'd like to, maybe you and I and Bradley sit down and see if we can figure out a good way to collect the names through the website and move forward with that on that approach. All right, I see it's getting late. We covered outreach and what I wanted to talk about around planning trails phase 2. We talked about it last time, and Jack, just to reiterate what we'd said, I appreciate and regard you as a helpful resource to make sure that we do things the right way. So
that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I read the conservation easement every afternoon before I come.
Good.
I'll get you a whistle.
It's good. I like that.
If you want, I can review what I want to talk about next meeting, just because there's nothing really on, because we're not really considering any spending
We're not
in the next 4 weeks anyway, so that's fine. I can develop it more. But just as a quick, 30 seconds, in the general meetings folder on the website, or the share file, for today's date, there's a folder there that says drafts, and there is a kind of a tracking sheet template that I think I'd like to deploy. It's not rocket science. It's basically just the idea is to compile any spending that we do in kind of like a regular sheet that we all have visibility on, so that we can kind of talk about ongoing projects, because there will likely be a multitude of projects as we move through the years ahead. To just get an idea of where's the money being spent, how much is left, as we consider, builds that we want to do, or any kind of restoration work, just understanding what that budget is, or if we have anything kind of committed to. The idea is we want to be able to just, not have to dig back 12 months through our receipts and emails when we compile a report for the city on an annual basis, or the town, not city, for the town on a regular basis. And also just to give, so that everybody kind of has an idea of what's going on and how the money is being spent. I'm a big advocate of transparency for that, especially among the movers and shakers of the group. And so just please take a look at it. Of course, the categories in there, not all of them are going to have money spent on them every month, or even maybe in any given year. Just to give you an idea of how I kind of categorize things, and things that we may want to consider, for instance, on the income section, considering what's approved for the town budget, what do we have in terms of what grants we've received from TPL and others. If we're going to do events, like some kind of biking or skiing event, can we get sponsorships for it as a source of income, or other events? Do we want to sell T-shirts, with the Wolcott Woods on it, or that kind of thing, and just see the idea of as we manage this space, what are some of the things that we may have to consider as we do these larger projects, and how they would be categorized in the report. So, ultimately, I'm going to use kind of the financial reports from the school board as kind of an example. I just have the pie charts, probably not every month, but maybe every quarter. So you can kind of see how things are moving versus what we budgeted and what we're actually spending money on, to save everybody some energy as we go into the following year. Cool. So that kind of repository. So be happy to revisit it once you guys have had a chance to look at it. I have things, the mic's always hot. So it's just a starting point.
I do want to touch on one more thing before we break out of here. Stand 8 is the pine plantation over here. And, I mentioned it to the select board, you know, we probably want to do something. I think, I'm proposing that, you know, I'll talk to Emily Potter, or maybe we can talk to Emily Potter. And I think it'd be good to try and get something going. The process, as I see it, is we need to talk to Emily and figure out, you know, what to do, what it would look like. We need to talk to the easement holders and say, here's what we want to do. If the easement holders say, yep, you know, express their opinion, and if they give us the go ahead, then we go ahead and do it. So that's fine with everybody. Then I'll take on the steps to get that and set that in motion.
Yeah, and that is basically what we're gonna do with it. We're not just gonna leave it alone, we're gonna manage it.
Yeah, well, specifically right now, it's overcrowded. The trees are suffering from the overcrowding. It's not it's you know, it's a plantation.
Right.
And it's not doing real well and probably needs some fitting.
Yeah.
Exactly, you know, does that mean going in and pruning some trees and walking away, or doing something else? That's probably something that you know, I think a consultation would be, and what I'd like to do is, instead of going back and forth and talking about it forever, I'd like to just have a consultation with Emily and figure out what, you know, within a subgroup of us, maybe it's Dave and I, or whatever, we'll figure out what the recommendation is, and then run that through the, as I say, the easement holders, the select board, if they, assuming their sign off, go ahead and do something.
This is a minor point, but in terms of contacting the easement holders, just bring it to me.
Okay.
We're getting ready to sign an MOU with VHCB, who's the other easement holder. That essentially puts NRLT in charge. And then any communication that needs to go back to VHCB, we would handle that for you. So you don't have to worry about that loop. You just work directly with us and we'll handle keeping them up to date.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I think I've expressed that to Linda as well, from the select board, last time I saw her.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, you'll probably, after we sign the MOU, you and will probably get a letter from us explaining what I just told you. You know,
Okay.
it's no big deal. It's just a formality, but put it on paper so everybody knows what the procedures are.
What I'm hearing kind of, you know, in between the lines on this is that VHCB is basically going to, you know, put you NRLT in the driver's seat.
And that's
as
not
long as you
atypical.
don't drive it into the ditch.
Right. And that's not atypical. I mean, that's what they do with all their land trusts that co-hold easements. I mean, they're estate agents. They don't have a huge staff. They have to rely more and more on local land trusts or, you know, like BLT or the nature conservancy.
Yeah.
To handle these things for them. So this is just another example.
Yeah, cool. All right. That's erosion mitigation, recruiting committee members. I propose we postpone this till next meeting.
Sure.
Cool.
Can I have a minute?
Absolutely.
I did intend to brush hog some of that small field up where the telephone pole was. Right now, it's limited to about 15% of the area. That's all I can get into. I did not touch it. I'm going to make a proposal, discuss it with the committee, and then write you a letter for some work to be done in probably May. I did brush hog the fields on the Bedell land and tried to leave us a soft edge.
Oh, good, good.
I did talk to the state engineer, highway department, and they said that about the only preservative that was legal to put on that bridge deck would be linseed oil. We can pressure, I've got the equipment to pressure wash the bridge prior to it. And you can buy 5 gallons of it in a few rollers, and the 5 gallons is $199. So that's available. The engineers thought the bridge being about 10 years old probably didn't need it yet. But we can think about
Yeah, I mean, it's a great bridge. We should keep it. The town, Linda and the select board were actually considering whether or not to insure the bridge. It's that got into there's a lot to that conversation. The insurance won't cover the abutments and the what do you call it, the skirts and stuff like that, which are all the things that are actually, you know, impacted by the last flooding. And
there are no wing walls on that bridge, it's just the abutments.
okay. So it was looking kind of iffy about even the, you know, what they could insure. It like covers the deck and questions about whether it's a pedestrian bridge or you know, a vehicle bridge. And I kind of advised that, you know, looking at how it survived the last couple of floods and all of the weirdness around the insurance, I question whether it's even worth putting insurance on it. You know, in the worst case scenarios, if the bridge is gone, what do we, you know, so access to the other side of the river, if we needed, you know, if we were going to do a harvest or needed some kind of, you know, serious access, we could put in a temporary bridge that we could, you know, there's other ways to get across the stream. We could get to the land through the Bourne parcel from the top or something like that. So those were some of the things we talked about. And basically, I was kind of saying, I don't think the town needs to spend money on insuring the bridge. So I don't know where the select board will ultimately land on that, but that was what I contributed to the conversation around it.
I did cut a little brush on the dam.
Oh, okay.
I found out that the brush average height is 35 feet. And there are pieces of brush that are 12 inches diameter on that dam, so it's actually quite a job.
Okay.
Really? So, and all the trees lean towards the water. So, I'm probably not gonna be up there again until May. But I will go at it again with a few more volunteers. I'm gonna walk, get permission to get closer access so we can actually get there.
Yeah, that would be a lot easier.
According to K1, we do technically have a right of way right at the edge of the property, the adjoining landowner's property, but it probably makes more sense to talk to him and just use roads.
Yeah. And the other thing is that dam is 200 feet long. Big.
Okay.
So,
You said there are trees like this on?
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's serious trees.
We need to do it, we need to do it. Or else what, you know, eventually the pond turns into a marsh instead of a pond and, you know, loses some water and, I mean.
Well, it's downstream.
How do you find it? Well,
It flows down the hill into the Mile River, you know, comes out over here.
we finally drill a few holes in the ice this winter to find out how deep it is.
Yeah.
I'd like to know that too.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's very deep, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the ledgy terrain, it might have some deep holes in it.
might.
That's a neat idea. I'll get up there on skis and snowshoes
Yeah.
or something. Yeah. Cool. What else? Oh, I did submit a budget to the select board for $5,000 for this upcoming year. And it's in a folder on the shared drive. If anybody wants to look at it. I don't know if it'll get approved or not, but that's what I asked him for. I basically took last year's $3,500 budget and thought, we're gonna try and throw a big party this year and we have some other things to do, and so that's there's also an open question as to whether that would come from the general fund, the town general fund, or whether they'd say, sure, go spend $5,000 from the stewardship fund. That's already set up. But I think, in my view, the town budget is for like, smaller incidental things, and the stewardship fund money that we have would be when we want to take on a big project. Just thinking about things.
And circling back to the pine plantation, were you gonna talk to Emily this month, or are you gonna wait?
I'll talk to her this month, and I think we got a few steps to go through to get anything to happen, and again, it's a question of how big of a job will it be. Dave, you had said something about maybe being able to do it. It's small enough to do as a volunteer. That's one thing. If it's going to take you some time and you need some compensation for it, then I think we have to make a formal motion about it and just make sure that it's all above the board, because it won't look good if the committee's paying itself to do work.
You'd have to open it up for bids.
Yeah. But
I've noticed not a lot of bids come in.
yeah. So
8:15.
yeah, I know.
Can we call it?
Let's call it.
All right. Anything that we didn't get to, I'll just put on it.
That's it.
They'll be due for next month, so we in New York.
All right, let's confirm we are meeting our scheduled time in December, or because I know a lot of places, or a lot of committees don't meet in December. I'm open. I don't have any conflict.
That's a good question. What's our second Thursday?
Gillian, that would be the 12th.
Gillian and Kelly resigned.
Oh, they resigned.
Yeah. So it's on the agenda. We have 2 open seats.
Okay, yeah.
Figured out our process.
Those are things I missed last month, must be. Did they resign in protest or just not enough time? Can we say?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I actually, they might have been in protest. I sent them an email suggesting that, with a smaller committee, having two folks from one household, they might want to think about opening up one of the seats. And they came back to me and said, "Oh, actually, we'll open both of them."
Oh, jeez.
So it's not quite like that. They were totally polite about it.
They were very open that they have a lot of travel plans coming up throughout the winter. They're pretty active, so.
Yeah.
Just for what it's worth, I can't be here that second Thursday in December, but Kate would likely be here, which is good as me being here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to. I've got some busy times between now and then. I might not be in town. That's why.
Do you want to just meet in January?
Let's meet in January.
Okay.
Be the 9th.
Yeah.
Give us plenty of time to grind out some website stuff.
Yeah. Sounds good. Let's make a next formal meeting on the 9th. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks everybody for staying over. Let's see. And,
I want to see. I want to see pictures of the Brooklyn operation.
yeah.